I'm going to be talking about strategy today. How do we actually implement a gift economy? Most of you probably already know what a gift economy is, but I'm going to go over it again just in case. Then I'll move on to more specifics about how to organize different gift economy systems and tips for navigating certain common pitfalls. The premise of the gift economy is simple. There is enough to go around. It's just not being distributed fairly because of the normal everyday functioning of mainstream economics and how that economy measures value and distributes resources. So I'll start with the evidence and explain why we need an alternative economy to begin with. Then I'll describe the gift economy and share this vision of what that alternative could be. The dominant economic paradigm has created massive inequality, and that inequality is worsening over time. Here you can see the comparison between a typical worker's compensation and that of a CEO. This comparison is emblematic of the overall trend of increasing inequality. The trend is obvious. Inequality has skyrocketed over the last 20 years and is still increasing at a rapid rate. Mainstream economics has stimulated growth and production, but it has done so at the cost of rising inequality and great cost to the environment. And we're not just talking about a little inequality, but a life-threatening inequality, one where some people are starved to death while other people are dying of overeating, and everyone is threatened by the destabilized climate conditions resulting from our short-sighted consumerism. As the income gap widens, so does the speed with which the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. The richest 10% now make more income than all the income of the bottom 50% combined. The growing income gap exponentially contributes to the widening wealth gap, which is even worse. In the US, the wealthiest 10% control over 50% of the wealth now, while the bottom 50% combined share barely 1% of the total wealth. This is everyone's problem. This trend of growing inequality is prevalent across all income levels, with every income group making a similar magnitude less income than the next income group above them. Even within the top 1%, the 1% of the 1% makes a similar magnitude more income than the rest of the 1%. This is perhaps the clearest and most up-to-date graph I have, illustrating the staggering rate of growing inequality in the US only seems to be getting worse every year. In 2023, when this video was made, there are just 81 people at the top of the pyramid scheme who hold just as much wealth as the poorest 50% of the entire global population combined. That means the combined wealth of 4 billion people, half the world, is the same as the combined wealth of just the richest 81 people. These statistics have mostly been from the US, but although the US is admittedly worse than most countries, data shows the trend of growing inequality is taking place around the world. This calls into question whether the type of government, or the tax policies, or the non-profits can ever change the direction we're headed. This is why proponents of the gift economy take a deeper look at the underpinnings of the market economy and consider whether there could be a fundamentally different way of doing things that could reverse these trends. The fundamentals of market economics are simple, but their consequences are complex. The laws of economics are not so much laws as suggestions, but because of their simple mechanism, it's just easier to follow along than it is to try to go against. But that doesn't mean these fundamentals should go unquestioned. Although market economics have been cast as an objective science, it is really more of a belief system. The whole process of business as we know it takes place because of a series of widespread assumptions and the behaviors that those assumptions produce. The most fundamental of these concepts is trade. Trade, verb, the act of exchanging something for something else. This is why the market economy is also often referred to as the exchange economy by proponents of the gift economy. Because even without money, the market economy exists wherever there is exchange. So bartering still creates a market economy, not a gift economy. Exchange. Verb. The act of giving one thing and receiving another in return, especially something of the same type or value. It essentially means you expect to make an exchange between two entities where each person or group gives something of similar value to each other at the exact same time. In a sense, it is on a fundamental level an act of distrust. An immediate exchange means neither party trusts the other to give in the relationship. In a way, it's a way of preventing the interaction from creating a relationship. It's a way of keeping both parties feeling free of obligation to each other. And so it's assumed, under this belief system, that people generally won't help you for free. That to expect any contribution from anyone, one must be compelled to contribute by the promise of an immediate reward from a direct exchange. As you can see here, both types of economies are fundamentally about giving and receiving. Any type of economy is essentially the way a society chooses to distribute its resources. It's just that different cultural norms and societal pressures result in different systems of distributing resources. The difference is that in a gift economy, the giving becomes uncoupled from the receiving, and everyone contributes to the collective well-being just for the sake of the collective, which does include them after all. In a gift economy, everyone would be expected to contribute something, but every contribution isn't compared and measured. Things aren't directly exchanged tit for tat. People just contribute to help the collective survive and thrive as a whole. This brings us to another important concept in the gift economy, which is reciprocity. Reciprocity is the quality or state of being reciprocal, mutual dependence, action, or influence. When we reciprocate, we're not giving to immediately receive, we're just giving without expectation, or at least we don't expect an immediate and direct reciprocation, although we may admittedly have a more long-term expectation that the other party will reciprocate in some way over time. And isn't this really just sharing? Something we were all taught as kids? Here are the two most relevant definitions of the kind of sharing we're talking about. To share is to divide or distribute in shares, to allocate proportionally according to some rule of proportional distribution, also defined as to hold in common. It's something we're all taught, but we all seem to forget. Why is that? What forces are at play that cause sharing to seem so unrealistic? What makes this most fundamental human habit feel impossible to uphold once we grow up and get into the so-called real world? To get to the bottom of that, we'll have to continue looking into the fundamental beliefs that the market economy is based on, and how these beliefs encourage just the type of behaviors that make it so hard to honor the principles of the gift economy. An even more foundational concept than trade, a concept that the concept of trade is built upon, is the concept of ownership. Own. Noun. To have or to hold as property. Trading things takes for granted the idea that people own things to begin with and that it's theirs to trade. It's theirs to decide what to do with. But this completely usurps the idea of sharing. If something is shared, no one owns it. If something is shared, it is held in common, meaning it is belonging to or shared by two or more individuals or by all members of a group. So something can't be common and owned at the same time. Herein we begin to see these two ideologies coming into direct conflict. Where the physical conflict of these two ideologies is forced to collide in the real world is when it comes to physical space, where one ideology holds space as shared while the other sees space as just another thing to be owned. There was a time where almost everything was shared, and everyone sought to take care of it because it was all of theirs. This was known as the commons. But where once everything was common, now everything is owned. This idea of ownership has slowly eaten away at everything that was once bountiful and accessible to all. Everything that was once shared was now seen as an opportunity, something to be taken for oneself, to be owned, to have its access roped off from the public so it could be profited from by selling it back to them. This is called property. The commons was stolen by force, little by little, century after century, fenced off and turned into private property. First warlords, then businessmen, claimed ownership over everything they could get away with, and became the gatekeepers to all the world's resources, selling it back to the ones who could afford it and letting the poor go without. This process took what was once known as the commons and turned it all into private property, deepening the issues of inequality and directly creating the possibility of homelessness for the first time. Now all the natural resources and natural beauty of the land, which were once everyone's to nurture and enjoy, have become just another commodity to be sold off, and homelessness has only increased year after year. The right to shelter, to sleep, to legally take up space has slowly eroded over time. These are the consequences that are caused by the behaviors that are incentivized by these concepts, by these beliefs of ownership and trade. The concept of ownership probably isn't going anywhere, but perhaps we might question the reach it has. Should private property exist as an unchecked commodity traded freely on an open market if most people can never afford to own property anyways, and the whole system of it dooms thousands of people to sleep on the street for years at a time? One of the most widely preached concepts in market economics is the so-called law of supply and demand. The phrase is loaded with false meaning. In this context, demand actually means how much people are able to pay. You can see that just by looking at the y-axis on the graph, it's not graphing how much people need or want something, it's graphing the price people are able to pay. Economics usually calls it the price people are willing to pay, but if you don't have enough money to afford something, it doesn't matter how much you want it. It doesn't even matter if you need it. If you can't pay for it, you aren't able to buy it, even if you'll literally die without it, as is the case with food and water. If you don't have enough money, this equation does not take you and your wants and needs into consideration at all, which is a pretty big deal considering it's the framework of how our entire global society operates and distributes resources, especially considering it's the same equation that is at fault for ensuring there will always be some portion of the population who don't have enough money. Unfortunately, too often the whole concept of poverty is cast aside as a necessary evil to the functioning of modern society. The solution to the problem is relegated to governments and charities, no matter how ineffective they're proven to be year after year, and the business world marches on without remorse as it maximizes profits. And to maximize profits, all you need to do is follow the laws of supply and demand, and the rest will fall into place. This is the simple little equation that most people use to set their prices and their rate of production, and it's the same equation that ensures some portion of people will always be priced out. Along one axis, we're setting the price. If you set your price really low, you won't make much of a profit. You'll sell a lot, but each product will be so cheap that the total profits will not far outweigh the cost to produce the items to begin with. If you set your price too high, you'll lose customers because people can't afford it. It's fine if you lose a few customers because you're making more profit per product and spending less overall on production, so your profits will still be higher. But if your prices get too high and you lose too many customers, you'll eventually start making less total profit. The so-called equilibrium price here is where the price would naturally settle if your only goal is to make the most money, no matter how many people are priced out of having access to the product you're selling. The other axis deals with supply. The more of something there is, the less people will pay for it. The less of something there is, the more people will pay for it. That means if you want to maximize profits, you do not have an incentive to produce a large supply. In a sense, this simple rule of market economics is what ensures the supply will always be throttled and there will never be enough for everyone. The less of something there is, the more people will pay for it, which again means more profit per item. And you spend less money on production since you're creating less of a supply. So again, your total profits are higher. This whole paradigm essentially incentivizes producing the least you possibly can for the steepest price you can charge. And you'll end up pricing out however many customers it requires as you find that steep price until you reach that so-called price equilibrium where you're officially maximizing your profits. There are real-world consequences to this level of unchecked inequality, and the consequences are dire. In a world that produces enough food to feed everyone, there are still 24,000 people starving to death every day. That's over 9 million people every year. That means every single year we have as many deaths from hunger as we've had from the first 3 years of COVID combined. Obviously, geography plays a role. The history of colonization and exploitation have left some parts of the world perpetually ravaged by the regular workings of the global economy, while other places barely face the threat of hunger at all. In Western civilization, the last wave of starvation we can remember is the Irish potato famine, which killed 1 million people over a few years in the 1840s. Since then, however, there hasn't been any famine. Even the Great Depression of the 1930s had recorded only about 100 deaths by starvation in the USA. But the extreme inequality we wrestle with does create a lot of hunger and food insecurity, with over 44 million people still facing malnutrition. Meanwhile, there continues perpetual war over resources we all use. You might say war is the reason for a lot of starvation, but war is the consequence of the market economy to begin with, and all the global players fighting over cheap access to goods for their citizens. The exaggerated stance taken by many first world countries in the face of a global pandemic exposes the underlying inequality of the value system we are operating on to begin with. The prospect of losing so many people in your own country seems inconceivable, despite far more lives being lost to hunger every year in countries far away. As this map shows, the inequality and suffering caused by the normal functioning of our global economy can become geographically entrenched, while richer people far away continue to benefit from that entrenched inequality. Hopefully, this slide helps people in wealthier countries to see how much they are actually responsible for inequality and starvation. We all share a small part of this, so it's up to all of us to try to untangle this situation. And if we were to take it as seriously as COVID, which we should since it's far more deadly, then we should be putting just as many resources into solving this issue as we put into manufacturing respirators and sending stimulus checks and things of that nature. And there is literally enough to go around. Over a third of all food produced worldwide is lost or wasted every year. Even in our current economic system, with all its incentives to throttle production to increase prices, we produce far more food than we would need to feed everyone. The problem is distribution. We distribute goods according to who can afford it instead of according to who needs it, and every day that we stick to that system of distribution is another day 24,000 people starve to death. Massive amounts of food are wasted at catering events for the highly paid employees of big companies. Meanwhile, there's very little economic incentive to give any food to anyone who can't afford to buy it from you. This simultaneous dichotomy of starvation and excess is not an evil conspiracy to kill people every year. It's just the outcome of our system of production and distribution, which favors whoever can afford it and doesn't give a second thought to the growing portion of the population who can't. What we're talking about here is artificial scarcity. Because of the law of supply and demand, the most fundamental building block of the market economy, the incentive will always be to maintain a sense of scarcity over any product or service you're providing. So, wherever there is an abundance driving down prices, businesses will find a way to manufacture scarcity to drive the prices back up, ensuring that despite our excesses and technological prowess, any sense of abundance remains a kind of mathematical impossibility. Examples of manufacturing artificial scarcity includes making things disposable so you have to keep buying the same thing over and over, limited items that only exist for the season, or any limited time offers that rush you into buying things. Just plain limiting the supply with the right product and advertising can be enough to drive prices through the roof. A good example is Beanie Babies, which had certain animals for sale at normal teddy bear prices, but then they would make only 5 or 10 of a certain animal and sell each one for like $1,000. There was also a ridiculous example of this recently where a rapper, instead of selling their music normally, sold a single copy of an album for thousands of dollars so that only one person who bought it could listen to it. And the idea of products deteriorating quickly rushes us to consume more, consume faster, as in before the coffee cools down, before the soda goes flat, before the soda gets warm. Not that some of these things wouldn't happen with or without money, but through advertising, our attention is constantly drawn towards these more fleeting and empty experiences, distracting us from true lasting joy. Everything becomes outdated, if only because of new versions coming out all the time, making you feel like yours is old, even though it's really not much different. And they can also enforce this idea that something is outdated by refusing to service it once it has been replaced by a newer model. Like a Tesla car, for all its environmental claims, is only serviced for 2 years before all that metal and a trunk full of lithium batteries is abandoned by Tesla, left for you to try to fix for yourself. After decades of these techniques creeping into every industry, we're used to them now and take them for granted. We expect everything to break, and we expect we'll have to just keep buying the same things over and over because that's what we've become accustomed to. But this isn't just annoying. This simple principle is causing catastrophic levels of pollution. The most straightforward way to describe this is the made-to-break philosophy. Everything's made to break. We think of this as making things just generally flimsy, but it's important to note how purposeful this is, which is illustrated by the fact that companies keep adding these strategic points of failure that wear particularly fast and are particularly hard to fix. My favorite example is the rotating tray on a microwave. They always seem to have this ridiculously complex, flimsy connector that the tray rests on, so if even the tiniest piece of plastic snaps off, then the rotating tray doesn't seem to work anymore. But this brings up another important point. Not only does artificial scarcity cause poverty and destitution, starvation, and not only does it cause astronomical amounts of pollution, but it also creates this environment where everything just kind of sucks. Everything is just kind of broken, no matter how much money you have. Because, as in the example of the broken microwave tray, a lot of people won't bother buying a new microwave just because this one part is broken, or it will take them a while. But some people will buy a new one, and that will make the company more money, and that's all the incentive they need to keep making their microwaves so crappy. But for as many new customers as it creates, It also creates just as many homes and offices where the microwave just kind of sucks and it's just kind of broken. But yeah, it still kind of works. Is this really the crappy kind of world we want to live in? Pollution is one of the biggest problems we face today, but just by looking at this handful of examples of artificial scarcity, you can see why we have so much pollution to begin with. If all the incentives of this type of economy tell us to make everything flimsy and disposable, and make everything considered completely out of date every couple months, then we're adding a tidal wave of toxic waste to oceans and streams every year. And this problem has gotten so bad, it isn't just about what's in our rivers anymore, but also about what's in our bodies. On average, we all eat about a credit card worth of plastic every day now because of all the microplastics in our food and water. The age of puberty has dropped dramatically in the last few decades, especially for girls. Autoimmune diseases, hormonal issues, cancers ravaging our bodies, all because of our careless economic incentives causing record tons of toxic waste to be improperly disposed of day after day. To further understand how the laws of supply and demand operate in an environment of increasing inequality, let's take another look at these two graphs. The price on the y-axis is the price people are able to pay. So the richer people get, the more they are able to pay. And the more they are willing to pay, since they have such an insane amount of money that they can just start throwing it away on stupid stuff. So as inequality increases, prices also increase, even though there are a growing number of people who are unable to afford even the basic necessities. Every industry has an overwhelming economic incentive to cater to their audience with the most money to spend. So everyone tends to cater more and more to the ultra rich because that's where all the money is. So basically, the laws of supply and demand simultaneously create artificial scarcity as well as a growing inequality. And then growing inequality causes the artificial scarcity to get worse every year as industries cater to an ever wealthier elite. This is why every year fewer people can afford to maintain even the bare necessities of a comfortable or safe life. And this is what brings us to the perplexing world we live in, where the bulk of human labor is spent serving rich people's hobbies, while thousands of people starve to death every day. Clearly, if there's people starving to death every day, there's plenty of work that still needs to be done. We need to feed those people, don't we? Yet somehow we live in a world where we have difficulty finding jobs, and those jobs are rarely helping the needy. We see this problem of imbalance everywhere today. Rich people and poor people, homeless people and people with multiple homes, people who can't find work when there's so much work that needs to be done, just because there's no one who wants to pay for it to get done. The gift economy is an idea both new and old. It's the idea of everyone contributing what they have to offer, everyone stepping up to help out wherever they see a need. And in this way, society could organize itself to have an ongoing social network where everyone takes care of everyone else. It runs contrary to the principles of business, but it's quite a natural way for humans to relate. It's the way most families operate within themselves. They don't make their children pay for a homemade meal. It's the way many homeless camps tend to naturally operate amongst themselves, even among strangers. It's the way many festivals conduct themselves once you get inside the gates. Here are some well-known examples of gift economies. Most indigenous tribes relied on some variety of gift economy. In general, their resources were shared. Sometimes they had events where large amounts of gifts were given and received. For instance, rituals where the leader might give away everything as a show of love for their people, and then the people give them stuff also as a sign of how much they approve of their leadership. And in general, indigenous tribes never really let anyone go without food or shelter. Festivals like Burning Man specifically promote the gift economy once you're inside the gates, although many of these festivals still cost a lot to enter, unless you manage to sneak in. Burning Man is notorious for operating on a gift economy once you're inside. Rainbow is particularly giving, with most camps serving food to anyone who comes by. At Rainbow, they have a saying, If you see a job, it's yours. Whenever you see something that needs to be done, you just do it. And even if you're new, I've learned from experience, if you're hanging out in a camp doing nothing for long enough, you'll probably get asked to help out. And it's always nice to be able to contribute to keep the camp going. Rainbow is put on completely by volunteers. In the weeks ahead, volunteers show up and build a whole village with bathrooms and everything, and no one is charged any money to enter. So, before, during, and after, everything about Rainbow is a gift economy. Then, of course, there's also scientists, a classic example of a gift economy with their sharing of knowledge. The whole idea of peer reviewing each other's work, publishing your work for everyone to see, everyone's work building off of each other, these are all along the lines of the cooperative spirit of the gift economy. Because information is so easily passed on and duplicated, information has never had the same artificial scarcity as physical goods, and has more easily lent itself to gift economy forms, especially in the digital age. Because information is so easily passed on and duplicated, it has this inherent sense of abundance. It's never had quite the same sense of scarcity as physical goods, and so it's easily lent itself to gift economy forms, especially in the digital age. The open source movement applied ideas of cooperation similar to those of science, where everyone considers that we would all be better off if we all had access to each other's code projects, and everyone's projects would do better if we all let each other suggest code edits. And in that spirit, Wikipedia is one of the shining examples of the abundance that can be achieved with the cooperative spirit of the gift economy. Wikipedia, the open source encyclopedia, such an accessible treasure trove of knowledge that the whole world built together for the whole world to use. And I listed blood drives to point out that a gift economy is not limited to the ancient past, and is not limited to festivals and brief experiences, and is not limited to sharing information only. Blood is a very physical item. It could be easily bought and sold, and it's incredibly scarce and incredibly needed. So under the paradigm of the market economy, you would think blood would be bought and sold at a high price on the market. But the vast majority of blood is still donated. This shows that with cultural values of caring and a little bit of organization, we can distribute resources more fairly, even physical resources. If only we realized food, water, and shelter are just as important as blood. Perhaps then all of our resources could be honored as sacred, the way blood is, and shared with each other out of the goodness of our hearts. But the gift economy won't happen on its own. We need to actively find better ways to distribute resources among ourselves. We need to do this on a personal level, but we also need to organize systems that encourage a more equitable sharing of resources. These systems can manifest as interpersonal relationships or as traditions or habits mediated by cultural norms, social agreements, and social pressures, as in the expectation of someone to pay it forward. Or these systems can be organized as events, or focused volunteer operations, or any other inventive new system someone comes up with. The gift economy can be elusive when it takes so many different forms, but here are some of the better known ways the gift economy presents itself today. I've categorized these systems of distribution to draw attention to their different properties and analyze their effectiveness, their strengths, and their weaknesses. The most basic system we have of distributing resources in modern society is giving away things we no longer use. I've labeled this the giveaway model. The simplest system is just leaving things you no longer want on the curb out front of your house. Or in denser cities, you'll often see half-eaten takeout boxes left on the top of public trash cans or on bus benches. Another variation is the free box, usually a cardboard box with a free sign on it, full of stuff you're giving away. As the saying goes, one man's trash is another man's treasure. In a world where inequality is staggering, this is a very quick and easy way of making things available to people who need it more, and will be more grateful to have it. Slightly outdated kitchen appliances, kids' toys, clothing people have grown out of, all appear on sidewalks and street corners everywhere. In more dense areas, where this is common practice, it's easy to walk around neighborhoods looking for free boxes when you need a pair of pants or a new jacket. Sometimes you'll find old canned food, boxes of pasta, old sneakers that weren't really that worn out. With a little luck, you could find almost anything. Then there's the Craigslist free section. In a way, this is even more accessible because it allows people to have a wider reach of audience, although it's less accessible in the sense that it takes more time to post something on Craigslist than to put it on the curb. But on Craigslist, people can search a free section far and wide, so you might give something away to a next door neighbor or someone from the next city over. Since it's so searchable, it has a wider reach, so it could be more likely that someone will find it, someone who specifically needs it, compared to just putting it out on the curb. Another popular one now is buy nothing groups. Apparently these tend to take place over Facebook. I don't have a Facebook, so I can't really take part in these. So to me, these seem pretty inaccessible. I imagine these groups work pretty similarly to Craigslist, except they use Facebook. So the communication is probably quicker, and in a sense it encourages more relationships and is probably more likely to lead to recurring interactions and eventual friendships than, say, the Craigslist free section. Since our social security is literally our social network in the gift economy, a system that encourages lasting friendships is great for the power and resilience of the gift economy, although it is done at the cost of the total surveillance of Facebook, so some people won't be able to take part. Not just paranoid or security conscious people, but also people who are avoiding abusive relationships or online stalkers. So this completely excludes people who may feel they have to stay off Facebook for their safety. There are other apps and websites as well, though, such as Street Bank or Freevia, which all have their own trade-offs and benefits. As far as I know, they're all pretty similar to the Craigslist free section, except it's probably even quicker to post items. But they're also all siloing all their own little they're kind of siloing off their own little communities and trying to get a market share or something in a lot of cases. So it'd be nice to have a more open source communal system instead of choosing between tons of different websites and apps. Finally, last on the giveaway list is the really, really free market. That's like a flea market where everything is free. These take place just by flyering and advertising a time and place and telling people that it's going to be a place where you come give things away to each other for free. The concept can be a bit radical for people at first, and you may find yourself explaining a few times that it's not a place for bartering, but after some work in getting the event to reoccur on its own at some scheduled interval, this is a great way to get the gift economy taking off because it has even more visibility and tends to take on a life of its own without an organizer. It's an actual gathering where people can meet their neighbors or other people who live in their city and come together under the spirit of generosity. This mingling of people under the spirit of generosity often tends to encourage relationships and thoughtful conversations on how to strengthen the gift economy. I once helped organize a really, really free market, and it was an amazing experience, especially to realize that it was still happening on its own when I came back to visit a few years later. It took a few months of flyering and figuring out how to tell people more about it and who to tell, but eventually it started to take off on its own. People volunteered to fix bikes for each other, people brought extra fruit they gleaned from their own fruit trees, people gave away books, all kinds of things. So that's the giveaway model. One of its strengths is its low barrier for entry, and it does not rely on any direct reciprocation. So someone who doesn't have much is allowed to take a little more than they give without feeling like they did something wrong, which can help equalize wealth among people. Then there's the library model. I suppose this also requires you to be okay with some degree of surveillance, since you generally need to use a government ID to use the library. Although there are certainly book and tool libraries that operate outside of government buildings and don't require an ID. But one of the strengths of the library model is that it tries to maintain the resources for everyone. One of the weaknesses of a free box is that there is no consequence to someone taking things they don't need or taking things only to quickly destroy them by misusing or abusing them. A library model enforces some degree of responsibility by keeping track of who is using it and who used it last. It's a way of making sure that precious resources, like a book or a tool, is still available and in good condition for the next person to use. If you're making a library that you want to be more accessible to people without an ID, one technique I've seen used is an instant camera that you take a photo of people when they borrow something so you have a picture of whoever had it last, even if you don't know their government name. Another technique is trading the item for something priceless, like their cell phone, because you're sure they'll want to trade it back soon. I think the library model is an especially efficient model at making sure everything is accessible to everyone, available from an obvious central point, and kept track of to be sure those resources remain in circulation for the whole community. It's completely free to use, or at least it can be, and it can be applied to a variety of reusable resources. The only thing it can't really be used for is resources that get used up, like food, things that can't be returned, which is a pretty big category of things. But for reusable items, I would say a library model is really a great way to go to maintain resources for everyone. Then there's the most direct and immediate gift economy that most people have some experience with, and that's just close relationships. Family, friends, close neighbors. These close relationships often provoke some sort of gift exchange of some kind. Sometimes it's just on special occasions, like birthdays or holidays. Sometimes it's just sending letters back and forth, or taking turns sending each other a bottle of wine. Communities of any kind act similarly, giving a spiritual concept or physical venue for people to rally around so that giving and receiving can more easily take place. Relationships and interconnectedness are often described as extremely essential to the gift economy, engendering generosity and establishing reciprocity. However, certain relationships serve to preserve wealth among the wealthy, as in the case of a wealthy family passing on its inheritance, although on some level this appears to be an act of generosity. Families often act as a self-interested entity, like a business, finding each other job opportunities and making economic decisions in their collective interest. They have no interest in equalizing wealth if it means their family has less. Similarly, friends and neighbors tend to come from the same economic class, and so sharing their resources would rarely make much of a difference on the overall equality of wealth. Relationships are a complex framework to build an economy on, and I think too often proponents of the gift economy breeze over the difficulty of maintaining relationships in the first place, often themselves coming from such isolating societies that they overly idealize relationships. But relationships can also lead to fractures and splits, people taking sides. Drama can cause a whole really free market to come undone at the seams. Time and time again, people have sought the freedom from relationships that the market economy provides, the freedom to be self-reliant, to escape your family, to escape the matrix of your childhood in the small town where you grew up. So I think to breeze over this as an ideal framework upon which to build the gift economy is a little short-sighted, although there is some truth to it. I think I'll have to make a whole separate video on this topic at some point, but relationships are definitely a good place to start, and having an ebb and flow of some sort of gifting between you helps keep a relationship strong. Relationships can hold you back or act as a support system to propel you forward. Just try to nurture the relationships that are worth nurturing. Finally, we have charity. This is an interesting category because it is usually predicated on the idea of giving only to people who are really in need. Among charity programs, there are often a series of questions to ensure you're actually poor enough to deserve their help, or make sure you're actually homeless before they give you a free lunch. But this model can never solve the problem of inequality because it is based on inequality. It is based on the idea that some people have much more than others, and those with more should help those with less. But this model segregates the haves from the have-nots and puts different classes on opposite sides of the table. On one side, you have people who want to feel helpful. On the other side, you have hungry people who need food. But the helpful people also need food, and the hungry people also need to feel helpful. So this division is artificial and is mostly based on separating different financial classes. Furthermore, if you do have some money, you're not supposed to take a free meal because it's reserved for the quote-unquote poor. This creates a rift and this dynamic where if anyone were to sit at the table and to take this free meal, then they are somehow agreeing that their life is a tragedy. You must cast yourself as being in this tragic state to get assistance. Because once you get some money, once you no longer need their help, you better stop coming. This also complicates things for those in need because they have trouble figuring out at what point they are no longer in need. They may only come to the meal when they have no money at all. But if they have $5, they eat somewhere else. Or they might never pay for food, going from homeless meal to homeless meal, saving their money for a deposit on an apartment. But then if anyone finds out, they may be seen as mooching off of free meals in the area because they have almost $1,000 and they should be able to buy their own meals. This whole situation creates an air of secrecy and guilt around the homeless meals and encourages people to waste their money on food whenever they have money, only to end up back at the homeless meal next week when they're out of money again, never able to get a leg up. The whole arena of charity depends on this pyramid scheme of inequality, and even stands in opposition to the idea of the gift economy, in the sense that charities tend to imagine the people they're helping will one day pull themselves out of poverty somehow. But if someone lives off of the gift economy, they will never pull themselves out of poverty in the typical way of making more money, because the abundance they are cultivating is all outside the market economy. So at what point will they be considered mooching from the welfare resources? If they depend on a certain homeless meal for breakfast every day for the rest of their lives and have no intention of getting a job, is that okay? This conflict is why charity is a tricky thing to interact with when you're trying to live within the principles of the gift economy. And charities are often profit motivated in the sense that they do get money and they spend money and they pay their employees, so they do have an income and ultimately operate similar to any other business. They are much more leaning towards making money than they are leaning towards making money obsolete. I personally think nothing is wrong about accepting help from a charity, but depending on which charity, it just seems difficult to find ways to integrate the charity model into the gift economy model in the long term, since charity usually depends on the inequality and monetary income to function. I suppose this confusing conflict is just something everyone will have to navigate on their own. So, to take the gift economy to the next level and the next step, we have to look at some of the very real obstacles we face before the gift economy can be a full-scale functioning economy. Which brings us to the concept of recuperation. Recuperation, a process whereby a radical social or political movement or idea is assimilated into mainstream culture, thus diminishing its subversive force. In the specific case of the gift economy, I take this to mean the tendency for the market to take everything that is free and turn it into a product for profit. Something which we've already covered is the reason that land is all private property and resources are all constrained by an economic system of artificial scarcity. So often, proponents of the gift economy are so excited by the idea that we can just start being more giving and just circulate more gifts that they forget that something destroyed the gift economy in the first place. Yet often, explanations about the gift economy start with critiques of the market economy and a historic explanation of how the market economy converted everything into capital and turned the commons into property. The market economy is often compared to a plague of locusts, finding every last resource and bleeding it dry as it continues to monetize every last thing on earth. Every day, new markets are created for human desires we only just invented with the last wave of commercials. Every aspect of our humanity is being monetized. At this point, some people are paying for or charging for a cuddle or a heart-to-heart talk because of how isolated we've become in our individual pursuits of wealth. So how can we forget what we're up against? I think it's because the answer is it's just so difficult. It's easier to imagine we can just be nice to each other and the market economy will slowly fade from our lives without a fight. For someone who longs to live in a gift economy, confronting the reality of recuperation means confronting the possibility of failure. The possibility that achieving the gift economy is just too difficult when going up against all the forces of the market economy. But I beg to differ. I think understanding the obstacles we're up against will only make us more resilient and more educated in our pursuit of a different method of distributing resources. But before we can find the answer, we have to ask the question. What will prevent people from taking the shared wealth of the gift economy and imagining it to be individual wealth, accumulating and hoarding it for themselves, and once again leveraging it as bargaining power within the market economy? What will prevent the market economy from reabsorbing value from the gift economy this time around? And the answer is, we are. We have to be the ones to stop this from happening. But to do that, we'll have to have a deeper analysis to reach a deeper understanding about how to defend the gift economy from becoming reabsorbed by the market economy. Here I've graphed some of these methods of distribution on a couple different spectrums I identified. This isn't necessarily the most important way of analyzing these systems. It's just what I came up with right now. It's better than nothing. This is just an example of the type of analysis that we need to do to truly strengthen and reinforce the gift economy. Okay, from left to right, I listed a spectrum of surveillance. It might have made more sense to call it accessibility. On the left, it's very accessible for everyone. On the right, unfortunately, for some people, surveillance is a barrier to entry. For other people, they actually feel safer with some degree of surveillance. So I think it's best to just accept that both types of systems are going to exist, and hopefully the people using both systems can also find ways to have the resources flow between them as well. For the other axis, we'll analyze how well these resources are protected. This is a tricky definition. What I really mean is whether or not these resources will continue to serve the gift economy versus will these resources just end up being recuperated and ultimately serve the growing inequality of the market economy. Here we have the buy nothing groups at the far end of the surveillance spectrum just because they use Facebook. But a regular library or tool library is also pretty far towards surveillance, depending on what system of tracking identities they use. Because for a library system to work, it has to have some way to keep track of who is using what. At the cost of a little tracking, the library system is probably the best one listed for protecting collective value and preventing it from becoming individual financial value. So I highly recommend creating and using some form of tool libraries. The buy nothing groups are pretty low on the spectrum from protected value because it's basically just giving stuff away. But you'll notice both the really free market and the buy nothing group I put higher up than the free box or the Craigslist free section. That's because both the buy nothing group and the really free market at least encourage interpersonal relationships by encouraging people to continue to interact, which I think would naturally encourage more of a spirit of reciprocity in paying it forward. I personally think of the really free market as the ideal entry point into the gift economy, but it does not protect value much better than a free box. Ultimately, there are no repercussions to taking a disproportionate amount of things for oneself or going elsewhere to sell those things for personal profit. It's only as far up the protected value spectrum as it is because people are interacting face to face and gathering under a collective spirit of generosity. But the really, really free market is a good place to start talking about these ideas to people. There's also this system of distribution now called the gift note. I've heard it mentioned before, but it hasn't seemed to catch on yet, so I wanted to explain why it's so important by putting it in the context of what we're calling protected value. You'll notice they're not at the top of the chart, but they're a step in the right direction since they're well above most other systems we've come up with. The libraries are very good at protecting value for the community, but they only lend out sturdy, reusable items. They don't provide services or perishable goods like food. The gift notes, on the other hand, can offer anything. They're also passed on with intention, not by prioritizing the needy, but by prioritizing the most generous. This vaguely protects value for the community and keeps it circulating within the gift economy by actually rewarding people for being more generous. This problem of recuperation can be a real bummer, but I think with some creativity we can invent systems that can negate that whole possibility. The gift note is one of these systems that could help change the game. But before I go on, I just want to make sure you understand that none of these previous methods are not worth doing. In fact, I think every gift economy system should be created, and each should flourish for its own purposes, each one strengthening the other by strengthening the spirit of generosity and the felt experience of abundance, and finding its own purpose and traditions among its participants. I also don't want all this talk of recuperation to make anyone think we should become obsessed with protecting collective value and scrutinizing everyone we offer help, beyond perhaps kindly asking them to pay it forward. The spirit of generosity is important and feels good to be a part of, and a gathering like the really, really free market should not be tainted with paranoia about whether the shared resources are going to become reabsorbed by the market economy. This sort of paranoia will come across as very antisocial and off-putting, and will only scare people away. So while the issue of recuperation might be a topic of discussion at a really, really free market, no one should be scrutinizing each other about how they're using the resources they got from the really, really free market. For the most part, you just have to accept that recuperation is not preventable. I think it helps to look at it as a weakness in the system and focus on inventing better systems that can naturally encourage resources to remain in the gift economy instead of the market economy, without micromanaging and scrutinizing people. Having certain systems that focus on this problem of recuperation also allows us to not worry about it so much in other settings, such as the really, really free market. And eventually, with all these systems working side by side, a full-scale gift economy will be able to calmly develop. So, the gift note is one of these new systems that takes into consideration this problem of recuperation and has built-in mechanisms to avoid anyone hoarding gifts and leveraging them as wealth in the market economy. The form factor is a similar size and shape as a regular dollar bill, which sort of draws attention to the fact that it's a replacement for money. Often people put drawings on them to further make them look like some sort of monopoly money, just to make fun of the whole idea of money. Like instead of a president, this one has a cat. And instead of the dollar amount, it has hearts in the corners. There are three important parts: the description of what it's offering, the contact information for how to get a hold of you, and finally, the expiration date. Hopefully we can keep them in circulation without losing them, but mistakes happen. It would be hard to avoid these things going missing every once in a while, so the expiration date makes it easy for the person who made the offer to just send the same offer out again after the expiration date if no one's contacted them. The beauty is in its simplicity. The gift note can start small and just symbolically circulate gift notes for little things, office supplies, homemade trinkets, homemade baked goods, etc. But because of how it works, the system will slowly grow, including more people and circulating more value. Since you can write anything you want on the gift note, they can theoretically meet any and every need. Any goods or services can be listed. The limit is our imagination. So this could theoretically become a vast system of distributing resources for everyone if we continue to use it. The idea behind the gift note is that it goes in one direction. You don't barter with different gift notes, you just pass them on without any expectation of any direct reciprocation. This way, they're allowed to pass on and on from hand to hand, creating connection wherever they go, until they find someone who has a need for the goods or services listed on the gift note. You also tend to pass on at least 9 out of the 10 gift notes you receive. This is so collective value isn't hoarded by anyone, and passes from hand to hand until it has gotten pretty far. This makes it more likely that value will be more fairly distributed and isn't just circulated among a single wealthy family, while elsewhere circulated among a tight-knit group of homeless friends, with neither group ever giving or receiving with the other. With the 9 out of 10 rule, it's much more likely value will actually circulate in and out of different groups and different classes. Finally, it is up to all of us to protect the collective value of the gift note system and prevent the value from falling back into the market economy. We do that by choosing wisely who we give our gift notes to. We must prioritize people who won't monetize the value they've received, who won't take all the value for themselves, who will themselves choose wisely about what direction to send their gift notes off into. To help you better imagine a gift note system in full swing, let's say you've organized a really free market in your neighborhood, and now you're ready to move your neighborhood towards the next step. You can make some gift notes and bring them to give away at the really free market. Try passing out 10 at a time. This makes it easy for the recipient to take one, knowing they've stuck to the 9 out of 10 rule. It also encourages more participation because it sets a precedent that we're passing out stacks of gift notes, not just single gift notes. If there aren't enough gift notes, you can't prove your restraint in not taking more than 9 out of 10. This might make people unwilling to take anything, or unwilling to take the rules seriously. Or they might loosely keep track of the total they've passed on until they've passed on at least 9 before taking one. Or they could simply add to the pile until it reached 10 again, and then they'd be taking only 1 out of 10 anyways. We only really need one person to give all of our gifts to, if we really trust them to honor the principles of distribution. But most people will enjoy giving gift notes to probably just about everyone they know. This way we can still meet people's needs without upholding a system of growing inequality, since gift notes allow us to circulate resources directly to where they're needed without the friction of business transactions and the nonsense of only helping the people with more money. So that's my introduction and my walkthrough of the gift economy, why it's better, why it's necessary, and how we can actually make it happen even though it seems impossible. And we've been fumbling for so long it seems like there's no hope, but really we just haven't quite wrapped our heads around the nuances of how to transition back to a gift economy type system. And we also get stuck in ruts thinking that we have to do it the same as it used to be in the ancient world, which we can't possibly do it the exact same way now. So it's really a matter of just thinking outside the box and figuring out how to make these systems that can actually encourage generosity and systems that could actually take off and grow and increasingly meet people's needs so people actually don't need money anymore. All right, thanks for listening.